Canada's hotel quarantine requirement for international air travelers ended back in August, but it is today causing new controversy. Thousands of air passengers who landed in Toronto or Vancouver were fined for refusing to quarantine in a hotel. But as we're learning, passengers who landed in Calgary and Montreal managed to avoid paying said fine. Janice McGregor is in Ottawa. Janice.
Good morning, Heather. Yeah, telling you about some journalism by our colleague Sophia Harris. Here's one example. She spoke to a woman, lives in Edmonton but has a home in Honduras, was visiting that home earlier this year, and was originally going to return to Canada, routing her flights through Vancouver's airport. But then she saw on social media some posts about how if you land in Calgary instead, you don't have to go to the hotel quarantine and you don't have to pay a fine. So she thought she'd try that, went through Calgary. She said no one stopped her. She instead just returned home, did her isolation period at home, and she never received any fine. And she wasn't alone. CBC News has spoken to 7 other people who also say they came home through Calgary's airport and did not have to pay a fine for skipping the hotel quarantine. Now, remember, sort of this hotel quarantine system was quite unpopular, not only because it came with a 4-figure price tag. It was very expensive to have to do this, but also people raised safety concerns. They talked about seeing crowded lobbies, that the quality of the food available was poor or inadequate, and in a couple of extreme cases, there were a couple of alleged assaults that happened in these facilities. How, though, did it happen that people were able to skip this without paying a fine? Government ministers told us this was mandatory, and they said that these rules would be enforced. They even upped the size of the fine at one point, so it was an even bigger deterrent. Well, apparently, in Alberta, the issue was jurisdictional. In that province, the Public Health Agency is unable to fine people because the province never adopted something called the Contraventions Act. This is a federal piece of legislation, and it's required in order to empower them to do it. Instead, only police forces like the RCMP or a city's police force could levy such a fine, but they say they can only investigate these cases if they receive a complaint. So if no complaint's received, nothing's investigated, no fine issued. So how big a deal was this? Did it really endanger the public? We can't say for sure, but we do know from Statistics Canada that over 33,000 non-essential travelers returned to Canada through Calgary's airport between March and June of last year.
So if that is the Janice, the jurisdictional issue in Alberta, what about Montreal? What was at play there?
Well, there too, we have a provincial jurisdiction issue. Return travelers there, again, you know, Sophia, check this out, were able to return without being fined, but only in Quebec, only provincial prosecutors are able to actually issue fines. And she checked with the Office of Provincial Prosecutions, and they told her that they were unable to supply any data for how many fines they had issued, or even in fact confirm that they had issued any fines. And you know, people are talking about how they went back through Montreal and skipped it. So this all becomes fodder now for people who are challenging the fines that they received for coming back through Toronto, for example. In court, this was already an unequal system. If you came home by land, for example, you didn't have to use the hotel quarantine system the way air travelers did. And the Canadian Civil Liberties Association also told CBC News that these examples just prove that this program was not implemented fairly for all travelers across the board.
Janice, thank you very much. And as
Welcome.
You quite rightly did, gave credit to our colleague Sophia Harris. She has a piece up online if anyone wants to read further, CBCNews.ca. Janice McGregor in Ottawa.